Years ago, when I was serving the church in Kentucky, we were having some kind of activity going on at the church, and it was supposed to start early in the morning. It might have been like a cleanup day or something like that. But I got to the church, and a bunch of the men were kind of standing around and sitting around like these guys, and nothing much was happening. But I walked up, and one fella said, "Howdy, preacher, we're just fixing to get ready to start." And I thought about that a second, and I laughed, and I've used that expression since then, obviously. I mean, think about it. Fixing to get ready to start. It means that you haven't started yet. It means you're not getting ready to start. You're just fixing to get ready to start. Absolutely nothing, though, is moving or happening, and sometimes that kind of describes the church. We're just not doing anything, just fixing to get ready to start. Well, in this morning's parable about people waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, we see a picture of the kind of attitude that Jesus expected of his church. See, in Jesus' day, wedding banquets didn't run on a schedule. Think about the last wedding reception you went to, right? You probably got an invitation for it. It was going to be from, like 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock on Wednesday, giving you the day in the month. Well, in Jesus' day, wedding banquets were kind of like a baseball game. Nobody knew when they were going to end, because once the bride and groom were married and they said and go through the meal stuff, and then the bride and groom would leave, but the people would all remain there and keep eating and drinking until the food and the wine ran out. And if you had somebody that was trying to impress their neighbors, they would have lots of food and lots of wine. So a wedding banquet could have lasted 3 or 4 days. I know there are still some Polish wedding receptions that last for days. I don't know how people can handle taking the time for something like that, but it goes on and on and on. So when Jesus talked about being ready so that when the master comes back from the wedding banquet, this wasn't a simple thing like the kids waiting for a balloon to pop, or just the kind of ways that we might wait for a reception to be over. He said we're supposed to be dressed and ready for service and keep our lamps burning. It's kind of hard for us at a gut level to feel the kind of thing that Jesus was talking about. Barb and Jerry aren't here this morning, but I know they're one of those snowbird couples that is gone for extended periods of time and then come back home. But when you do that, when you're gone for maybe even months, it's a lot of work coming home and getting everything livable in your house again, right? In Jesus' day, you had to, if you came back when it was cold, had to heat your house up. So how long does that take when you just have a fireplace to go ahead and heat your house? Might take a while. There weren't any forced air furnaces to warm the whole house up. Maybe some of you remember what it was like if you had an old pot-bellied stove to heat your house when you were a kid growing up or something like that. It takes some time, or in the summer, to try to air out all the stale air out of your house if you've been gone, and get the air conditioning turned back on. It takes time. And, you know, in Jesus' day, you had to go out and get water and bring water in for what you needed to do. And go out and get some food because they didn't have refrigerators to just go and pop it open and see what's in there. So returning home after being gone a long time was a lot of work. No wonder people would have wanted a servant to be there to keep the house up, to keep things running and organized and in good shape for when you came home, especially if you were worn out from traveling. They wouldn't have wanted somebody there who would leave the place like this. Any of you ever gone on vacation and left your kids at home and had come home with it looking like that? I hope not. I don't think even Ezra could get a house quite that messy. That would be somebody that probably has been there and not been able to get up and clean things up or straighten things up. But you would want somebody that would be there working and taking care of the place all the time that you were gone. Well, everything that Jesus talked about in this parable points to, I guess, what we could call active waiting instead of just plain lazy sitting around doing nothing. He talked about the importance of being dressed and ready for service. Every year when I was a district superintendent, we would go to this week of meetings called Bishop's Week at Mount Sequoia near Fayetteville, Arkansas. And it was a time you get to meet district superintendents from all over the South Central United States, and there would be speakers we'd hear, there would be workshops to go to, times when we would do just, you know, kind of fake exercises with other superintendents to sort of help us learn what was happening in the broader church, things like that. And it was also a time when people who were running for bishop could come and shake hands and schmooze. You know, it's campaigning just like you have campaigning for office. Kathy hasn't been doing too much schmoozing yet, so if you want to get up and schmooze while I'm talking, Kathy, we'll understand. You can feel free to do that. But at any rate, there was one night during that week when every bishop and their cabinet was allowed to have time to themselves to conduct whatever business they needed to conduct. And so one year we got done kind of early with our business, and we went out to supper. We went to a Persian restaurant. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to a Persian restaurant, but you get to eat stuff like hummus and flatbread and a bunch of other dishes with names that I can't remember. It was just really exotic food. There weren't very many people in the restaurant, but the owner of the restaurant was the head waiter. And so we sat down at this table, and there were 10 or 12 of us that were there. And the owner was the one taking care of us. And this guy had to be the most phenomenal waiter that I've ever had wait on me anywhere. We sat there, and if any of you have ever been around Bishop Ann Shearer Simpson, she likes to talk, and so we were there for like 2 hours eating, okay? While the bishop talked to us about this and that and the other, and we discussed some things. But this waiter, all that you had to do was kind of look up from your plate and look around for something, and he was right there asking what you needed, what he could get you. And for the entire time, he wasn't running around frantically. He never seemed to be panicked, but he was always just right there when you needed something, like if he could read your mind. He was probably just very good at reading people's body language, but think about how much attention you have to pay to people to anticipate every need that they have that way. It was an amazing experience of seeing somebody doing this active waiting. Well, I think that that's the kind of thing that Jesus was talking about for us. Well, waiting and being attentive, ready to serve wasn't the only way that Jesus talked about us needing to be ready and waiting for his return. He also talked about this kind of awareness or diligence, watching out for things. Because he said, if the owner of the house, the guy at the bottom, had known what time the thief was going to break into his house and steal stuff, he would have prevented it, right? So there's this kind of diligence or protectiveness, almost a patrolling that Jesus was talking about going on. It sort of reminded me, since our sister-in-law is a former forest ranger and forest firefighter, the way that in a forest fire, apparently there are people that have to go around constantly looking for hot spots that might flare up and restart the fire, or sparks that might fly in the wind that could restart the forest fire, and I mean, there it goes again. So that kind of patrolling got me started thinking about, well, what kind of sparks or embers do we need to constantly be on guard against, patrol against? And I was thinking, well, in our lives, we need to constantly be on the alert against greed, especially with the Powerball and Mega Million, right, going crazy. They said this morning that it was like, for one of them, the ticket sales were $800 a minute. I can't even imagine that kind of money that people are being paid. Couldn't you imagine if people gave us $800 a minute for an hour-long church service? I'd preach for 2 hours if that would work. Heck, I could keep going, but we've got to guard against greed, especially when there's stuff like that. Bitterness and unforgiveness. It is so hard sometimes to, when you are hurt, when you are emotionally wounded or physically wounded, it's hard sometimes to forgive and not let that bitterness build up. But yet the Bible says over and over to avoid that. We also have to constantly battle against what we could call all of the sins of the flesh, all those pleasures that tend to try to trip us up and draw us away from God. But I'm going to be willing to bet that nobody here is going to be tempted to murder somebody this afternoon, right? At least I hope that's the case. I'm also betting, I'm expecting that nobody is going to be tempted to go out and steal a bunch of stuff, right? Or to go out and cheat somebody. So those sins of commission maybe aren't the main thing. I really think that our biggest obstacle, our biggest concern, the biggest kind of spark that we have to guard against is what Wesley called sins of omission. Things that we should be doing that we just don't do. That, I think, is a big obstacle for us. There are times that I am just flat out lazy about getting stuff done. Yesterday, in the afternoon, we cleaned the gutters and winterized the camper, and by the time it was supper time, I was just I was just wiped out. It seems like when I was young, that wasn't such a challenge to do that kind of stuff, but I was so tired I couldn't hardly drag myself. It's hard when you do that kind of stuff to gear yourself up to go out and do some of the good things that God asks us to do. There is a church renewal program called 10 Brave Christians. I've talked about it before in the church. It's a 6-week-long program where a group of people participates and they agree to spend a half hour in prayer and Bible study extra every day. They agree to tithe, give 10% of their income during that 6-week period. They meet every week for at least an hour for the 6 weeks to talk about how their experience has been going, where they've run into difficulties. But the toughest thing is that every day the participants are asked to plan and then to carry out one anonymous good deed for someone. First week or so is pretty easy. But man, you start talking about trying to do a good deed for someone anonymously. After a week, it gets to be a lot of work. I mean, that was the experience of the first group that I was a part of with this. People were doing things like, they would send somebody that needed help, like a little gift card, or send a little gift to somebody, or like one woman had a friend who was going through a tough time, so she baked an apple pie and then left it on her doorstep and rang the doorbell and ran. I mean, for me that would take all day because I'd have to throw away 3 or 4 pies that I ruined trying to make one that was edible. But you can only do so much of that stuff, and then it just is hard to be intentional about planning and doing good for someone. So if you want a great exercise sometime to really help you grow as a Christian disciple, try that. Just try doing an anonymous good deed every day for 6 weeks and see how much work that actually is. Well, that's just kind of a taste of what Jesus wanted for us. He wanted us to be constantly about serving God by serving others. Jesus said that the result of watching and being ready, being faithful about that would be that when the master returned, he would wait on those servants who had been faithful. He'd have the servants recline at the table and he'd wait on them. Now, obviously, none of us are going to be able to be ready the way that Jesus talked about if we're just doing it for what we can get out of it, right? It's like a good waiter or waitress. They have got to love people and love what they do. They've got to love hospitality in order to do that work. If they're just doing it to get bigger tips, it's going to fall flat eventually. You've got to love what you do, and it's the same way as Christians. We've got to love loving and serving others in order to keep it up. But Jesus said that he expected us to be serving and loving others in his name when he returns. And he added another warning, as Jackie read in Mark's Gospel, that his return would be at a time that nobody expects. It would be at a time that is just inconvenient, right? You know, like when your mother-in-law shows up. It's going to be one of those things that will say, oh gosh, if you could have just come back when I wasn't arguing with my spouse, or when I wasn't yelling at my kids, or something like that. And he said, keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows at dawn. There's a watchful group just waiting for the master or mistress of the house to come home, and then they'll bark and meow and jump all over the place, right? Well, Jesus wants that kind of expectant attitude. He doesn't want to come back and find his people just fixing to get ready to start being disciples, right? Thanks be to God for this alert that Jesus gave us to do more than just fixing to get ready to start. Amen and amen.